Implementation of the MGNREGA, the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act, hereafter referred to as just as the NREGA, and I'll refer in particular to events that took place in 2006, the very first year when implementation started in Badwani district in southwest Madhya Pradesh. So in relation to the panel, this actually relates with one of the sub-components that I was told about, which is the state and the politics of development. So that's what where I would be able to locate this paper. So the NREGA, we all know about it, but I'll just lay out a few things. Created a legal justiciable right to work for all households in rural India, where all households were now able to demand work on publicly funded work sites for at least 100 days per household per year, and irrespective of gender, workers were to be paid a statutory minimum wage for a day of work done. Public works, of course, have a significant history of implementation in colonial and post-colonial India, but the watershed, the importance of the NREGA really was that this law created for all of India a justiciable framework of rights in relation to public works. So in my presentation today, I'll draw on the work of the Jagrut Adivasi Dalit Sangathan, an Adivasi Sangathan self-defined as such, that has membership in several sub-districts or blocks in Barwani district of Madhya Pradesh. And I'll discuss JADS's engagement with the district and sub-district levels of government in claiming this novel right to work. So a few words on JADS are in order. JADS can be described as one of several new social movements in West Central India, including Southwest Madhya Pradesh, particularly since the decade of the 1980s, and along with movements such as the Khedut Mazdoor Chetna Sangathan and the Adivasi Mukti Sangathan that have been discussed by Amita Baviskar, Alf Gunwald Nielsen, Rahul Banerjee, amongst others, and the Narmada Bachao Andolan, of course, maybe the most famous of all of these that has been discussed by all of the above authors and also by Neeraja Gopal Jayal, amongst others. These movements have mobilized outside the realm of mainstream party politics and have raised questions that have been neglected by the mainstream party political left. So they've centered their work on demanding probity in the running of state institutions. JADS itself started work around 1999 in what is now party block of Badwani district. In the period of 2008 and 2009, this Sangathan had a membership of roughly 5,000 households in Pati, Pansemal, Badwani, Rajpur, and Sendhwa blocks of Badwani district. And a mini sort of footnote here is that more recently, the membership of the Sangathan has actually shrunk, but I'm not going to go into very much detail on that. But at the time when I was doing fieldwork, the membership was quite strong, around 5,000 households. The Sangathan is run on the basis of contributions from Sangathan members, and this is also supplemented by private donations by supporters of the Sangathan. Its leadership is from villages where the Sangathan works and also includes an urban educated activist who has been involved with the Sangathan since its inception. So, as I mentioned, what I'm going to discuss is JADS's attempt to challenge existing state-society relationships by way of using this new text of rights defined under the NREGA. And in order to discuss my empirical work, I'm going to be anchoring my work, or anchoring some of this material around a few theoretical points, so I'll just lay them out. The first is the drawing on Sidney Tarrow and Charles Tilley. I highlight that the repertoires of contention or tools of contention, tools of engagement, strategies of engagement that the Sangathan adopts in order to draw on this, this new text of rights, these tools of engagement are built over time. They don't just emerge overnight, suddenly. They are built over time. They draw on experience. They also draw on the experience of other Sangathans in other parts of the country. And yet, at the same time, the NREGA itself, the new text of rights itself, does offer something new, offers a new, offers an additional tool to build on existing tools, and to, it adds a layer of tools that the Sangathan deploys. Partly correlated with this is a second point, that in relation to asserting the claim to the idea of citizenship, and in this attempt to change and challenge existing state society relationships, the use of the law for the Sangathan involves two things. One is the use of letters, literally letters written to the district administration and even the sub-district administration in relation to how the NREGA is being implemented. And so this is a very sort of formal type of strategy that the Sangathan adopts. But in addition to this, there is a second strategy that almost necessarily has to be adopted by the Sangathan, which is the use of dharnas or sit-ins on some occasions, in some instances. So in other words, the Sangathan adopts the formal practice of creating written records on the one hand, but also uses what Upendra Bakshi calls popular illegality in order to claim work under the NREGA. A third, very marginally engaged with point is relates with Partha Chatterjee, and there is, of course, a lot of work that challenges Chatterjee's binary between state and civil society. But I would suggest that that the material in this paper too can contribute to the existing work by many, Nandini Sundar, for instance, that challenges Partha Chatterjee's binary between, that sort of splits society into civil and political society. So in order to discuss the above, I'll draw on ethnographic fieldwork done in the 2007 to quite substantially in the 7-8 period, but also leading up to 2011. The postscripts are all related to 2014-15. And what I'm actually going to draw on, the empirical material is split into two. I'll first discuss 4 letters that the Sangathan submitted to the district administration in relation to NREGA implementation. That's one section of the empirical material. And the second relates to a claim for unemployment allowance, which is defined under the NREGA. So by way of discussing these letters, what I'm trying to bring out is to my mind, these letters can help us understand this change, this attempt by JADS to push existing state-society relationships, to challenge the existing societal status quo. So starting with these letters, so the first letter, the first of these 4 letters, in fact pertains not to the NREGA itself, but pertains to the Sampurna Gramin Rozgar Yojana, or SGRRY, which was a public works program implemented prior to NREGA implementation, prior to the point when NREGA implementation started. But there's a overlap between SGRRY and NREGA that is in fact written into the law itself. So while local administrations are getting ready to start NREGA implementation, they're allowed to continue using perspective plans related to SGRRY. This is written into section 4 of the NREGA. So the first letter relates to an SGRRY work being implemented in Derwalia village in party block of Barwani district. And this letter submitted by Sangathan activists states that 600, this is submitted in May 2006, it states 600 workers employed on a roadworks program under SGRRY, employed in the February to April 2006 period had not been paid till 2006. The letter cites an order of the Supreme Court of India to state that payment for public works programs should happen within a week of work having been completed. This is the right to food case that's being referred here. And the letter states very simply that the district collector should be ordered to, it asks the district collector that payments should be done immediately and that punitive action should be taken against the sarpanch and the sachiv of the village. So in a sense, it's just a reminder to the district administration that, look, we've done this work, we haven't been paid for it yet, so can you speed up our payments? A second letter relates to village Pokhlia in party block in Barwani district. And this letter states that some people employed on a small dam construction site in Pokhlia were employed for a few days in May 2006. After this, these workers who were JADS members were told not to come back to the work site, and subsequently a labor displacing machine was used by the district administration. Actually, I'm getting mixed up. 7. Okay. A labor displacing machine was used, I beg your pardon, not by the district administration, but by some local contractors. Now, keep in mind that legally labor displacing machines are illegal in public works programs. These are, if you've done field work, you would have seen JCB, large JCB machines. These machines are illegal simply because these works are intended to create wage employment, and labor displacing machines are also owned by well, the local powers that be. So it would, it's just a route for corruption. So this letter essentially reports this fact to the district administration, says that disciplinary action should be taken against the sarpanch and sachiv, and that laid off workers should be re-employed on NREGA work sites. Keep in mind, so that this second letter pertains to the NREGA now. Now, the third letter, to my mind, so these first two letters are sort of just, in a sense, mundane letters that are creating an official record, in a sense, of JADS's protests that it's recording with the district administration. This third letter, to my mind, indicates some sort of a shift in local power, and this also relates to the NREGA. This letter relates with incidents that took place in village Keli in party block in Badwani district. And before I go into the letter, it's important to keep in mind that, as I said, one of the important factors related to the NREGA, something that needs to be kept in mind in relation to the NREGA, is that NREGA created, of course, a legal right to work, but workers could now submit written applications for work, which, when submitted to the district administration, made it legally obligatory for the state to provide work. And this clause within the NREGA, as can be seen in this letter, actually really threatened the local powers that be for a very simple reason. And the reason is that at an earlier point in earlier public works programs, they were able to, the Sarpanch and Sachiv, the they here is Sarpanch and Sachiv, they were able to dictate when work would start, and they were also able to dictate who would be able to work at a work site. This power is taken away from the district administration, and in particular from the Sarpanch and Sachiv. So this letter states that that sort of similar to the earlier letter, workers submitted a work application, work started, work was stopped, and then workers who had been employed on this work site, subsequent to submitting a work application, these workers were told by the Sarpanch and Sachiv that we will not employ any workers who submit a written application for work. And so after laying off, for want of a better term, after laying off these workers who had submitted a written application for work, the Sarpanch and Sachiv went on to employ workers from the village who had not submitted applications for work. So they're trying to, in a sense, disempower the workers who had used the law and sort of maintain their power hierarchy. But it was not just this. The letter, interestingly enough, the letter to the district collector describes an incident where the workers who were laid off there was actually a scuffle between the workers who were laid off and let's say agents of the Sarpanch and the Sachiv. And so along with the letter, there's a copy of a complaint filed with the SHO of the Silawat police station, which covers this area. So this letter states that this is the detail of the letter, and I'll overstep time a little bit. The detail of the letter is that on a particular day, after being laid off from this work site, these workers were walking towards their homes when an associate of the Sarpanch approached them on a motorcycle and, referring to their written applications for work and through a string of foul abuses, he got off his motorcycle, slapped one Sangathan member and said to him, essentially, do you think your father's the ruler around here? Are you going to dictate when work starts? And he also goes on to say to the Sangathan member, come to me tomorrow, I'll castrate you, turn you into a fly and swat you. The Sangathan members go on to say in the letter that the next day some of us went to the village Patel's house. And it so happened that the Sarpanch and Sachiv came to the village Patel's house while we were there. Similar to the previous incident, he again used, the Sarpanch again used foul language and asked some Sangathan members, do you think you rule around here? And then he turned to women members of the Sangathan and said to them, and you lot, just watch out, I'll add you to my harem. Tumhe rakhunga. So the letter to the district collector in Badwani says quite defiantly, so is this the law now, that the Sarpanch keeps women after he is elected? If there is any such law, then all of us women will go to the Sarpanch, and it's signed by 15 members of the Sangathan. So this is not as mundane a letter as the previous two, but it describes a challenge to the local powers, the powers that be. But it's important to keep in mind that the axis on which this challenge is based is actually based on the NREGA. A letter was submitted, and that threatened the local powers that be. The fourth letter, very quickly, essentially, I won't go into the detail of the letter, but what's interesting about this letter, the fourth letter, is that it doesn't pertain to a particular village, it pertains to many villages. And it, in fact, indicates a collation of information by the Sangathan in various villages. Collation of information pertaining very specifically to specific clauses of the law. So job cards, according to the law, have to be given to us 15 days after we have submitted applications for job cards in such and such and such and such village. So many job card applications were submitted, they have not been, we have not got job cards, etc. The reason why this is significant and interesting is that the process of collation itself is interesting to observe, because in the process of collation, what happens for Sangathan members is that hurdles experienced in different villages are in a sense rendered commonplace for Sangathan members, and then the act of collating and discussing these hurdles makes them somehow surmountable problems. And so this also pertains to an interesting point that has been written about in relation to the NREGA, that in some places this rights-based legislation has actually created an axis around which people could organize, and this particular letter provides some evidence of this. I won't go into the detail of the second section related to claiming unemployment allowance. I'll just say that it's interesting that this particular incident of claiming unemployment allowance under the NREGA that I've got in this paper is actually, it so happens, the very first instance of the claim for an unemployment allowance anywhere in the country under the NREGA, and that's significant not only because it's the very first, but also because under the Maharashtra Employment Guarantee Program, which was implemented since the 1970s, there was a clause related to unemployment allowance, but it was never once claimed. So this was the very first instance where this unemployment allowance was claimed. But in this particular incident, again, without going into detail, what's important is that letters, again, formal procedure was followed, letters were submitted to claim unemployment allowance, applications were rejected at the sub-district level, Pansimal and Party block panchayats rejected these applications. The Sangathan then almost had to resort to a dharna at the Badwani district collector's office, subsequent to which an appeal was filed at the district collectorate, and after which unemployment allowance was paid to members of the Sangathan. And keep in mind that this wasn't a small number of people who got the unemployment allowance. This was in the range of 1,600 persons who got unemployment allowance. So I'll wrap up with just a minor point that I'm trying to correlate with, the theoretical points that I laid out earlier. I would say that it's important to keep in mind that that these rights-based legislations are interesting and of course very important texts of law, but viewing them from a socio-legal studies lens is perhaps useful because the actual politics of their implementation is much more complex than we ordinarily understand. And so essentially all I would say is that this new text of rights in this region doesn't settle politics or redefine politics in a definitive manner all of a sudden, but it's important to keep in mind that it adds a very important and interesting layer to the production of local politics. Thank you.
Footnotes from today. So Sangathan membership is declining.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little about that?
Yeah. Interestingly enough, everyone can hear me? Yeah. So interestingly enough, Sangathan membership is declining, and the Sangathan correlates this with the weakening of the NREGA. So because so the period that this paper pertains to is a period when the center was in fact very interested in NREGA implementation, and it was this glorious program that they were tom-tomming not just everywhere in India but also internationally. And so there was a flow of money from the center to the districts. In other words, it was easy to start a new work. Money has since been constrained. There are delays in wage payments, and so people are now now have in a sense gone back to a situation they were in earlier, in that they have to migrate to pick cotton in Gujarat, etc., or do construction work or work on the lands of larger farmers, and this shrinking of the NREGA, in a sense, has actually, interestingly enough, led to a shrinking of the Sangathan. And the Sangathan is quite concerned about this. And
Yeah, but is that also your, do you buy into that argument, or are you proposing in the paper other possible explanations for this?
Well, for this, I'm just taking this at face value from the Sangathan, partly also because this pertains to fieldwork in 14-15, and I haven't gone into all that much more detail on this. But this is, even if there are other factors, this is certainly an important factor.